Vivid verses.
There's a particular kind of intelligence you develop when you've loved someone for a long time. Not the intelligence of knowing them, but the intelligence of reading them. You stop hearing what they say and start reading what they do. You track the small discrepancies between the two. Most people call this suspicion. I call it paying attention. I've been paying attention to Camille for a while. Not in the way that corrodes a person from the inside. No obsessive cataloging of offenses, no mental file cabinet stuffed with grievances. More like the quiet vigilance of someone who has noticed that the bridge they cross every morning has started to creak. You don't panic. You don't rip up the bridge. You simply start paying attention to where you put your feet. The birthday party was her idea from the beginning. "Let me plan it," she said, somewhere in the early stretch of the year when my birthday was still months away and the gesture still felt like love. You never let people do things for you. "Let me do this." I remember thinking it was a nice thing to say. I also remember noticing what it contained, the soft implication that I was the problem, that my reluctance to be celebrated was a flaw she was generously working around. I filed that away and smiled and said, "Okay, sure." Why didn't say, "I've been dropping hints for weeks about wanting something low-key, a backyard thing, close people." My friend Theo with his cheap wine and his loud opinions. My cousin Ray, who would show up in a wrinkled shirt and make me laugh until my ribs hurt. Maybe 4 or 5 others. People who had known me before I knew Camille, which is the only real test of whether someone actually knows you. She'd heard all of it. I knew she'd heard it. The party was scheduled for a Saturday. The venue was the back patio of a restaurant called something with an ampersand in the name. The kind of place with Edison bulbs and a chalkboard menu and prices that are just high enough to signal that you've arrived. She'd handled the reservation. She'd handled the invitations. She'd told me it was a surprise, which I'd played along with even though I'd received approximately 4 texts from peripheral acquaintances asking if I was excited for Saturday. A surprise party that 17 people know about is not a surprise party. It is a performance of a surprise party. I understood that. I was prepared to perform my surprise. What I was not prepared for, or rather, what I had suspected but had not yet confirmed, was the guest list. I knew something was off 3 days before the party. Theo called me on a Tuesday, casual in the way he gets when he's trying not to make something into a thing. We talked for a while about nothing much, and then near the end he said, "Hey, I didn't hear anything about Saturday. Is there something happening?" I kept my voice easy. "She's handling it. You know how she is. Everything's a project." "Right," he said. There was a pause I recognized. Theo has known me since we were 23. He does not do unnecessary pauses. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something. "I'll look into it," I said. After we hung up, I sat with the information for a while. I didn't call Camille immediately. I didn't make it into a confrontation, not yet. I thought about it the way you think about a chess move. Not just the immediate exchange, but several steps out. If Theo wasn't invited, who was? I knew, or I thought I knew, but I needed to sit with it and be honest with myself rather than reactive. I ran through the list of people Camille interacted with regularly. Her college friends, Bianca, Lacey, a rotating cast of women who all seemed to share the same opinions and the same way of tilting their heads when they were about to agree with something. Her coworker Fern, who had come to dinner once and spent the whole evening subtly quizzing me in the way that people do when they've already decided you're a suspect. Her friend group's various husbands and boyfriends, men I'd met a dozen times and still couldn't quite locate. They all had the slightly glazed look of people who had surrendered some interior part of themselves for the sake of social peace. These were Camille's people. They were loyal to Camille. They reported to Camille. In the way that close friend groups operate, the texting and the debriefing and the communal analysis of every significant event. Whatever happened at this party would be filtered back to her through 17 different pairs of eyes. And my people Theo Ray, my friend Donna, who I'd known since college, the 3 or 4 others who would have made it actually feel like my birthday, were not there. I thought, she's building an audience, not a celebration. And then, almost immediately, the question is what for? I could think of a few reasons. None of them were comfortable. Some of them were about surveillance, wanting witnesses who would give her a particular version of the evening. Some of them were about control, making sure the night unfolded inside a context she constructed. And some of them, maybe, were about something I hadn't fully named yet, the possibility that something was changing between us, that she knew it before I did, and that she was using my birthday to lay groundwork. I filed that away too. I called Ray on Wednesday, casual, asking if he had planned Saturday. He didn't. He mentioned offhandedly that he'd been meaning to get together. He did not mention any party. So that was that. I spent Thursday and Friday in a state of particular calm. I've noticed that when I've already made peace with a situation in my own mind, the external drama of it doesn't land the same way. I knew what Saturday was now. I knew what I was walking into. And because I knew, I had options. I thought about those options carefully. I could confront her before the party, make it into a thing, demand to know why my friends weren't invited, turn it into an argument that would either end the party or end something larger. But I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of watching me react. And besides, I was curious. I wanted to see the whole shape of it with my own eyes. I could simply not go, but that felt passive in a way that didn't suit me. Absence is not a decision, it's an avoidance. Or I could go. I could be exactly who I am, warm, present, genuinely pleasant. And I could work that room on my own terms, and I could make sure that when I left gracefully and on a timeline I controlled. I liked the third option. I texted Theo Thursday night. "Are you around Saturday evening?" He responded within 2 minutes. "I can be. What's up?" I called him instead of texting back, because some conversations are too specific for a phone screen. "Here's what I need," I told him. "I need you to be available Saturday, not earlier than 9. And when I call you, I need you to come get me." A beat. "What's happening?" "My surprise party," I said, "to which you were not invited." Another beat. Longer this time. When Theo speaks after a long pause, it's usually because he's choosing words carefully to avoid saying what he actually wants to say. "I see. It's fine," I said, and I meant it. "I just want an exit. A clean one." "Done," he said. "Call me, and I'm there." I slept well that night. Better than I had in a while, actually. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do when you're waiting for something. Not slowly, but strangely, with too much light and too much quiet in the early hours. I went for a long walk in the morning. Came back. Made good coffee. Read for a while. Let the day have its shape. Camille called around 2 in the afternoon, affecting the light casualness she uses when she's managing something. "So tonight, dress nicely, okay?" I made a reservation somewhere. "A reservation," I said. "Somewhere nice. I thought we'd celebrate. Just the two of us." A pause that was slightly too practiced. "I thought it would be nice to have a few people." "I'm sure it'll be great," I said. I meant that too, in a way. It would be interesting at the very least. I dressed well. I wore the charcoal jacket she'd once told me made me look like I own a room. I thought that was appropriate, given the circumstances. The patio was strung with lights that were probably beautiful in an objective sense. Tables had been arranged in a loose cluster, wine glasses already out, a small arrangement of flowers on each table that I recognized as Camille's aesthetic. White and green, minimal, curated. She had taste. She'd always had taste. That was never the issue. There were perhaps 20 people already there when I arrived. I clocked them in the first 30 seconds with the peripheral sweep that I've developed over years of walking into rooms where things are happening beneath the surface. Bianca, Lacey, Fern, Camille's cousin from out of town, A woman named Gretchen who had always looked at me with this slightly narrowed gaze of someone who has heard a version of me that isn't quite me. A couple I recognized as people Camille had worked with 2 jobs ago. I'd met them once at a dinner, and they'd been perfectly pleasant. 3 men I placed as husbands or partners of people in Camille's circle, standing in the way that men stand at parties they didn't choose. 2 women I didn't recognize at all, but whose body language, the micro glances toward Camille, the attentive stillness, told me they were recent additions to her orbit. And Camille herself, standing at the entrance in a dress the color of deep water, her face moving through a sequence of emotions I watched very carefully. There was genuine delight in there. She was happy to see me. I believed that. I'd always believed that the love was real, even when I questioned the rest of it. But underneath the delight was something watchful. She was reading the room too. We were both reading the room. "Surprise," she said. I let my face do what it genuinely did, which was something between amusement and warmth. I kissed her. I told her it was beautiful. I looked around with the expression of someone taking it all in. What I was actually doing was confirming my count and noting the exits. No Theo, no Ray, no Donna, no one who predated Camille in my life by more than a year. Every single person on that patio had been, at one point or another, a source of information flowing back to her. I did not say this. I filed it. "Come meet everyone," she said and took my hand. "Here is something I know about myself. I am genuinely good with people. Not in the performed way that some people are good with people. Not the backslapping, not the theatrical interest. Actually good. I remember things. I ask questions that come from real curiosity. I make people feel like their specific life has some weight to it because I believe it does. This is not a strategy, but is useful. I work that patio the way I would work any room, which is to say I didn't work it at all. I just moved through it and let myself be present. I talked to Fern for a few minutes about something she'd been going through at work, a bureaucratic frustration she'd mentioned at a dinner months ago, and she lit up that I remembered. I sat down next to one of the men I didn't know. Turned out his name was Conrad, and he was a structural engineer, and he was funny in the dry, exhausted way of men who were surrounded by people much louder than them. And we talked for 15 minutes about bridges, which felt cosmically appropriate, given what I've been thinking about all week. I talked to Bianca. I like Bianca, actually. She's not a bad person. She is a person who is loyal in the way that certain people are loyal, completely, and without much examination of whether that loyalty is deserved. She has that quality of listening that makes you feel heard, while also storing everything you say for later use. I made sure everything I said to Bianca was something I would be comfortable hearing repeated. Lacey was nearby for most of the evening. Lacey has always been the keener observer of the two, the one who is more likely to make a precise cut than a broad swing. She came over at one point and said, "So, are you surprised?" "Genuinely," I said, which was true. Not in the way she meant it, but true. I ate well. The food was good. She'd ordered for the table, which she does when she wants control of a situation, and the choices were solid. I had 2 glasses of wine, paced carefully because I wanted to be sharp. I laughed at the right moments. I told a story about something embarrassing that had happened to me recently, self-deprecating enough to be disarming, interesting enough to hold attention. Everyone laughed. A couple of people said things like, "Camille, he's great." She was watching me the whole time. Not obviously. She was never obvious. But I could feel the attention. She was reading what I gave her, and what I gave her was nothing that would alarm anyone. What I gave her was the best possible version of an ordinary birthday. I went to the bathroom at 9:15. The bathroom was inside the restaurant, down a narrow corridor lined with framed photographs of things that were supposed to evoke a pastoral simplicity. I stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Not long, just enough to confirm that I looked fine and felt fine and knew what I was doing. Then I called Theo. He picked up before the second ring. "Come get me," I said. 1 hour. "The patio place on Emerson?" he asked, because Theo pays attention too, and I'd mentioned the name of the street in passing the week before. "That's the one. Text me when you're outside." "Got it." A pause. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "I'll tell you everything when I see you." I dry my hands. I check my reflection once more. I thought, briefly, about what the next hour would look like and whether I'd done the math right on my exit. The math was simple. I needed a reason to leave that was considerate enough that she couldn't argue with it and vague enough that it left no trail. I had the reason. I'd been holding it since Thursday like a card I hadn't played yet. My friend's father, Theo's father, in fact, which was conveniently the truth, had not been well. Theo had mentioned a few weeks back. Nothing acute, nothing alarming, but not well. Enough that checking in felt natural. Enough that if Camille looked into it, she'd find something real. The details would take care of themselves. Theo would confirm whatever needed confirming. We'd always been good at that, not covering for each other in dishonest ways, but understanding each other's instincts well enough that explanations aligned naturally. I walked back out to the patio. The air had cooled slightly, the way it does in the deep part of a September evening when the day's warmth hasn't fully surrendered yet, but is beginning to. The lights were doing what Edison lights do, which is make everything look like a memory in real time. Camille was talking to Gretchen, and she looked up when I came back out, and there was something in her face, a checking, recalibrating, and I walked straight toward her and put my hand briefly on her back and said something easy, and she relaxed. I circulated again, slower this time, with the settled quality of someone who is comfortable and present. I talked to the two women I didn't know. Their names were Simone and Petra, and I immediately recollected. One was Simone, and one was Alara, and I made a small joke about confusing them that landed well, and I found them genuinely interesting, which made the next 45 minutes easier. Simone worked in landscape architecture. We talked about designing for use versus designing for aesthetics, and whether those goals were actually in conflict or whether they just required sequencing correctly. She had strong opinions. I like people with strong opinions. I gave her one or two of mine, calibrated to be interesting without being polarizing, and by the end of the conversation, she was laughing and leaning forward slightly the way people do when they're actually engaged. Alara was quieter, more watchful. She reminded me a little of myself. Actually, someone who assesses before committing to a position. We talked less, but it was denser, the kind of conversation where you cover real ground in 10 minutes. At one point, she said, "You're very relaxed for someone at their own birthday party." And I said, "I learned a long time ago that the best way to enjoy something is to stop trying to enjoy it." And she looked at me with a kind of recognition and said, "Yeah." I checked my phone. Theo had texted, 10 minutes out. I gave it 8 minutes. Then I found Camille. She was by the bar with Bianca and Lacey. The three of them in the easy configuration of old friends who have a shared language. She saw me coming and her face opened. "Hey," I said, "can I steal you for a second?" She excused herself, and we moved to a slightly quieter corner of the patio. I kept my expression warm but calibrated towards serious. Not alarmed, not cold, but the face of a man delivering information. "I just got a text from Theo," I said. "His dad had a rough evening. He's asking me to come by." I watched her face move through the sequence. First concern, genuine, I thought, then something that was not quite suspicion but was adjacent to it. She'd spent the evening watching me, and I'd given her nothing to work with. And now I was leaving, and she didn't have a foundation for the argument she might have wanted to make. "Oh," she said, "is he okay?" "Not sure. That's why I want to go check." "You can't just call?" "I can," I said. "But Theo called me, and when he calls instead of texts, it usually means something. I don't want to be the person who stayed at a party." That last part was constructed carefully. It turned the situation moral. It made leaving not about wanting to leave, but about being the kind of person who shows up for people. It also contained a very faint implication that she would understand, because she'd always said she valued that quality in me. I was reflecting her own language back at her. She looked at me for a moment, searching. I gave her nothing to find. "Okay," she said. "Of course. Go check on him. I'll text you when I get there." "True. Don't let this cut the evening short. Everyone's having a great time." "Also true." She nodded. There was something behind her eyes that I noted and did not acknowledge. "I wish you could stay." "I wish I could too," I said. We held each other for a moment. I kissed her temple. I felt her relax slightly into it, and I felt the complicated sadness of that. That even now, at the end of something I was increasingly certain was ending, the physical grammar of us still said things that the rest of us had started to contradict. I pulled back gently. "Happy birthday," she said quietly, and there was something in it that might have been the real version of her, the one underneath the management and the strategy and the curated guest lists. The one I had loved and still might love and couldn't fully figure out what to do with. "Thank you for tonight," I said, genuinely. Then I turned and walked back across the patio. I said goodbye to people properly. Not rushed, not performed, actually proper. I shook Conrad's hand and told him I hoped the project he'd described finished on schedule. I told Simone that I was going to think about what she'd said about design sequencing, and I meant it. I thanked Bianca and Lacey for coming, and they both hugged me, and Lacey looked at me with that precise analytical gaze, and I looked back with complete openness, and she had nothing. Gretchen said, "You sure you can't stay?" "I've got a friend who needs me," I said. But this was really something. I walked out through the restaurant, past the pastoral photographs, out through the front door and onto the street, and the night air hit me, and I breathed in and felt something loosen in my chest that had been held since I'd walked in 2.5 hours ago. Theo's car was idling about 30 feet down from the entrance. I walked to it, unhurried, and got in. He looked at me. He doesn't often start with words. He waits until I'm ready. I settled into the seat. I put my seatbelt on. I said, "How's your dad?" "Better," he said. "Thanks for asking." A beat. Then we both started laughing. Not the sharp, relieved laughter of something survived, but the low, easy laughter of two people who have known each other long enough that certain things need no explanation. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. I thought about it. Somewhere with food. Real food. I ate at a place with a chalkboard menu, and it was fine, but I want something that comes in a basket. "I know exactly where," he said, and pulled out into the street. We drove for a while without talking much. The city moved past the windows, lit up in its Saturday night way. Theo has the particular gift of comfortable silence. He never fills it unnecessarily, and so being with him has always felt like being with someone who is actually there rather than performing presence. After a few minutes he said, So I said, "You want to tell me what's happening with you too?" I looked out the window. A couple was walking a dog. An older man was sitting on his stoop reading something. The ordinary traffic of a night that meant something to me and nothing to them. "I think I already know what's happening," I said. "I've known for a little while. I just wanted to see the whole shape of it. And tonight gave you the shape. Tonight gave me the shape." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to eat something in a basket," I said, "and then I'm going to think." He accepted that. That's the other thing about Theo. He never pushes for the timeline. He trusts that I'll arrive at things when I arrive at them, and he's always there when I do. We got food at a place with a counter and bad lighting and very good everything else, and we sat in a vinyl booth and ate and talked about other things, his work, a movie he'd seen, a conversation he'd had with his brother that had been funny in retrospect. Normal things. The kind of conversation that is itself a form of care, because it reminds you that your life is larger than the current difficult thing inside it. At some point, eating, I felt genuinely happy. That was the thing I wanted to hold on to. Not the difficulty, not the sourness of what the evening had revealed, but the fact that at 11 o'clock on my birthday, I was in a vinyl booth eating good food with someone who had known me for years, and I felt entirely myself. That, it turned out, was what I'd wanted all along. The next few months had their shape, and I moved through them with the clarity that comes from knowing what you're doing even when it's hard. There were conversations with Camille that I won't detail here, not because they were dramatic, but because they were mostly sad, the way the end of real things usually is, more quiet than loud, more tired than angry. She never quite understood what I'd seen at the party, or rather, she never acknowledged it. At one point she said, "I just thought you'd enjoy being around my people." And I almost laughed, not unkindly, but at the precision of it. My people, she'd said, without any evident awareness of what those words contained. I didn't dissect it for her. That was not my work to do. What I did was be honest and clear and finish the thing a way I could respect myself for. I didn't make her a villain in the retelling. She wasn't a villain. She was someone who managed things and had managed me, and I had let it go on longer than I should have because I'd loved what was real in her and had been patient with the rest. Patience has a limit. Mine had reached it. I moved out of the overlap of our lives the way you move furniture out of a room, methodically, without ceremony, until the space is clear and can be reorganized. The following September, my birthday arrived with the uncomplicated quality of a day that belongs entirely to itself. I've been thinking about it since spring, not with any urgency, but with the quiet pleasure of planning something small and exactly right. Theo and I had been talking about it loosely. Something at his place. He had a backyard that in late September would be perfect, not yet cold, the light going golden by 6. He had a fire pit he'd built the previous summer that we'd never actually used because the previous summer had been full of other things. I called Ray in August. He said, finally, with the particular warmth of a man who had been waiting to be invited somewhere for too long. Donna texted me first. Somehow, she'd heard from Theo, or from Ray, or from some communication that travels between old friends faster than I can track. She said, "I want to come if there's something happening." And I said there was and gave her the date, and she sent back a single thumbs up followed by 3 different food emojis, which is as formal as she ever gets about her enthusiasms. I kept the list small. 8 people, 9 including me. All of them people who had known me long enough to have seen me in my least managed, my least curated, people who had witnessed both the ordinary and the genuinely difficult stretches of my life and had stayed anyway, not out of obligation, but out of the specific gravity of real friendship. I handled the food myself mostly, got a few things from a place I liked, brought over supplies, did most of the cooking at Theo's in the afternoon while he and I talked about nothing in particular, and the sun came through the kitchen window in the low way it does in September. Ray arrived first, in a wrinkled linen shirt that made me feel an enormous fondness. Conrad would have appreciated it. Donna arrived second, with a bottle of wine she said was excellent, and a book she said she'd read twice and wanted me to have, and the inscription she'd written inside made me laugh twice, once at the joke and once at the precision with which she'd aimed it. We ate outside as the light went golden, the way I'd pictured it. The fire pit worked. There were some chairs that weren't quite enough, and one of us sat on a cooler for a while without anyone making a thing of it. The conversation moved the way conversations move between people who have earned a right to talk about real things. Loose and associative, sometimes serious, more often funny, occasionally both at once. At some point, I looked around at the table, at these 8 people in my fire-lit backyard, in the clear, cool air of a turning season, and felt something settle in a place inside me that I hadn't fully noticed was unsettled. This, I thought, this is it. Not the Edison bulbs and the chalkboard menu and the curated flowers on carefully placed tables. The wrinkled shirt, the cooler chair, the book with the precise inscription, the conversation that doesn't perform itself. I'd known it all along. I just needed a year to get back to it. Theo, at some point later in the evening, when the fire had burned down to a comfortable level and the conversation had wandered into the comfortable territory of old stories, raised his glass in my direction without making a speech about it. Just raised it. I raised mine back. Donna noticed and raised hers. Ray noticed and raised his. And then everyone was raising glasses without anyone quite calling for a toast, which is the best kind of toast, the kind that happens because it's already true. "What are we drinking to?" someone asked. I thought about it. "Good company," I said, and knowing the difference. A couple of people laughed because they thought it was just a birthday toast. Theo didn't laugh. He looked at me with that particular long focus attention of someone who has been alongside a thing through all its phases, and he nodded once, and that was enough. We drank. The night went on, and I was entirely in it, not managing it, not reading it, not tracking its subtext or calculating its implications. Just in it, the way you can be in something when you're surrounded entirely by people who don't require anything from you except exactly who you already are. That was the birthday. That was the one I kept.
Thanks for listening.